It's not as if she were a maniac, a raving thing. She just goes a little mad sometimes.
And I say, insect or man, death should always be painless.
She just goes a little mad sometimes. We all go a little mad sometimes.
We all go a little mad sometimes.
I caught him, Sheriff. Wait, who is it? Billy Loomis. Sir.
Pardon me, I'm Loomis, Dr. Sam Loomis.
I think our friend Sam Loomis didn't know that Marion was here.
Oh, Sam, I hate having to be with you in a place like this.
Well, just listen to me. When you go down the street to the Mackenzie's house, I want you to tell them to call the police.
Your car. Drive down to the Mackenzies. We must be mad. Literally mad. Watch a few movies, take a few notes. It was fun.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to episode 84 of Double Feature Horror Show with a strangely flattened image. That is odd. How's that? Yeah, that's better. That's better. We're working with the old aspect ratios here. It's all fine. I will be quick about this because I am somewhat dying now. It's like, I don't want to be overly dramatic, but I am rather ill. Waifu's rather ill. And Poe is a very busy and functioning human being. And as such, I think we might be looking at the most efficient episode of Double Feature Horror Show ever to avoid there being an on-stream fatality. That's the plan. What do you reckon?
Looking forward to it. What's going to be, like 8 minutes? I think we could do
speed run.
Speed run, yeah. I liked it.
I'm up for that. So, folks, you should absolutely know we are covering It Follows from 2014. I hope you have done your horror homework. If not, you know, can YouTube go up to 16 speed? You can probably breeze through it in the intro. I don't know. If you haven't seen it, stick around. I think this is a lot more about the analysis and the plot. That's my stakes for it. That's how I feel about it. But we will touch on the film in a little bit, because we will, as usual, open with a topic. And I'm kind of relaxed about this because I'm not going to be helming it. Poe, you're being an absolute hero and leading the topic. Would you care to take it away? But maybe before that, is there any shilling you would like to do first at the start of the stream?
Lately, I've been trying to get more illustration commissions. So if you go see my Twitter, you can see all of the commissions I've been doing lately, drawing cartoons and comics, profile pictures, marketing material. I've been busy doing all kinds of drawings. It's one of the only hobbies I can do while holding a baby. So I've been getting really into drawing lately, and I've been making a lot of people happy. So if you want to have any kind of artwork, graphic design, illustrations done, have a look at my style and see what you think, and get in touch. And watch Women's Hour Fridays at 9. That's plenty of shilling for now.
That's wonderful shilling. I didn't know you dual wielded while you draw.
It's the only hobbies I can do these days. You know, browsing Twitter and reading blogs is the only things I can do while holding a baby. So that's what I've been doing a lot.
I just think I should have prepared and got the one you did for me, and I can't find it in my folders. Curses.
I'll have to finish that sometime.
I love it. I did find something while we're doing the shills. Gosh, where is it? Here we go. We are on YouTube, folks. You know what to do. There is a like button. There is a subscribe. I know, maybe it's a sickness. Maybe
I was not prepared. That's brilliant.
Have you been watching Popcorn in Bed? I don't mean the snack. I mean the channel on YouTube called Popcorn in Bed.
No, I've never heard of them.
I have nothing but disgust for reaction channels, and yet I've been completely obsessed with this young lady on YouTube who reacts to movies. And she has a very clever editor who edits together an entire movie into like a half-hour video where you just get, all of the important plot points. You get all of these really adorable reactions. And she did Misery recently, and you can just imagine this very sweet young. She's like a Mormon girl. She's never seen any films ever, so you just get to see her sort of wide-eyed. First reactions, like a little baby deer wandering into these movies. She's very sweet.
That's adorable.
You should check that out, especially liking popcorn and talking about women this month. So I feel it's justified. But how about you two? Since you're feeling sick, you just go lie down and cover your eyes, and I'll cover the next few minutes with our double feature, shall we? The what do you call it? The B side, the A side of
was
the
that like
stream.
Mum? Was that just Mum autopilot? Bit down, yeah. Tuck you in, yeah.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. You just relax. I'm going to take the next few minutes to do the topic, and you deserve a rest.
Go for it. You rock on. Let's kick off Women's Month.
Yeah, well, since you told me that you wanted to do films sort of about women and with talking to women, I thought it would be best to start off the month with what I consider to be a pretty basic analysis of women in horror films being sort of the leading lady. It's a genre where female leads are sort of overrepresented compared to other genres where the typical protagonist is a male and you kind of need an excuse to make it into a woman. It's sort of like the default versus the special case. Whereas in horror, it's almost the opposite, where the default is to have a female protagonist or a final girl, the girl who makes it to the end if it's a kind of slasher movie or a survival sort of scenario. And to me, it seems pretty obvious why that's the case, and I think a lot of people think along these lines that agree with me. But if anyone does disagree with me, please make yourselves known. But I believe that with women, there's a heightened sense of danger because they are seen as more vulnerable. They're kind of more likable as well, just on a default level. If you see like a beautiful teenage girl, you don't need a reason to like her. Like, we like her already. We already want her to survive without having to know anything about her. And not only that, she seems very vulnerable. She's kind of naive, and she's not very physically imposing. So even just having a slightly domineering other person threatening her can be enough to cause some alarm. So imagine how much worse it is to have some gruesome horror stalking her. So that's definitely the case in It Follows, and I think it's also the case in sort of classics like Terminator, like Alien, these huge films where the films that come to mind when you think of female protagonists, and even slightly sort of badass protagonists, they often end up getting into that role, I believe, not because they're badass, but because they are sort of more vulnerable. And to see them become empowered over the course of the film, or in some cases for that not to happen, it really works with the genre of horror, and even in sort of thrillers to some extent. So that's my basic thesis. To sum it up and put a bow on it, I wondered what you two think, if you agree with me.
I'd go for it. I think it's I hadn't thought of the likability, but I definitely I'm not even disputing it's a thing. No one is fighting this. Women dominate the protagonists. No argument here. But yeah, I thought of it from like the effectiveness of the fear, like exactly as you said, you worry more for a woman. But there's also the factor of like setting up the disparity in power. And they'll even have the old Worf effect. As it was called on TV tropes, like you'll frequently have a big buff good guy all muscled up. If Harry were here, I'd have an image of a topless lad just to annoy him, but we'll skip that this week. just so that person can be offed in the most casual, toss them across the bridge of the Enterprise manner, and just to show you how serious the threat is for the final girl to take on. So yeah, that's absolutely in there. But I hadn't considered the likability angle as well.
Sorry, what is it?
I was going to say, I think there's also something really in there about that the vulnerability. It's not just that they look vulnerable, but I think there's something quite primal, particularly younger women. I feel like on some level we are sort of primed to want to protect them. Like I remember, not a horror film, but I suppose a very early version of a horror film. I saw an adaptation of Macbeth once, and the woman they had playing Lady Macduff was pretty young compared to the rest of the cast, and they sort of enacted the murder on stage, and it was really awful watching because you could sort of tell everyone around you was kind of going, I want to stop this. I really want to stop this happening. It's like, it's a play, but at the same time, you're like, oh God, this is awful. And I think there's something in us quite deep-seated that wants to protect women and girls in a way that we sort of don't with men or young men.
Well, from an evolutionary psychology perspective, which is sort of more what I talk about on my channel, probably doesn't. We don't go into it much on the double feature horror show so much. So I'm sorry if it takes in a weird direction, but if you think about a very vulnerable tribe of people, thinking about other people not as we do these days in a modern sort of atomized society, but in more tribal times when we'd live in a group of like 50 to 100 people, a young woman who is she's aged to the age of fecundity, where she's able to get pregnant, or she may be pregnant already, and you can't always tell from looking. There really is nothing more valuable to the tribe than a woman who will carry the next generation, because the typical example is to think of a tribe that loses all of its men except for one can still survive if there are enough fertile young women for him to impregnate. But it just takes so long for a woman to carry a pregnancy to term, and then that may not even be a fertile, successful pregnancy. That a tribe with lots of men and only a few women just won't survive. You need lots of young fertile women to propagate the gene pool. So that's very much an in-baked instinct, I believe.
Could we maybe take that a little bit further and say that actually we're maybe quite resistant to seeing chaps as vulnerable? Like if you tried to have a chap do the horror protagonist role, and it's hard to feel I wish to protect.
Well, think about Terminator versus Terminator 2. You start off with young, beautiful woman, Sarah Connor, want to protect her, and then where do you go from there? Well, make it like a cute little boy. Children are also in need of protection. I think adult men certainly they do feature in horror films. It's not like it's not effective.
But it has to be a very different role. Sorry to talk over you, wifey. There's like a couple of things that spring to mind immediately, like the Silent Hill movie when it was being adapted. Obviously, in the first Silent Hill game, your protagonist is a dude, not the most masculine gun-toting dude ever, but a dude. And they switched it to a female protagonist for the movie, basically because they said it felt like he was doing a female role. And then comes to I have other experiments come to mind, like Friday the 13th Part 2 with its infamous sort of very homosexual subtext, which there are many reasons the film didn't work, but I think potentially trying to have a male character in the role of a vulnerable girl was one of the other reasons that people didn't take to it as much.
I was going to say, I think there's an element where sometimes you can have male protagonists in horror films, but they're often slightly feminized if they're in that more of the kind of traditional final girl type role. Whereas I think you can have now immediately can't think of any examples, but you can have male protagonists who aren't feminized, but the films are often less formulaic, she says, making a blanket rule.
Well, there's Misery. We just saw it a few minutes ago of the he's very much a man and quite a manly man, but he's got just having broken legs and being bedbound makes him very vulnerable, even to a quite mumsy kind of character being able to dominate him.
Mum goals.
There's also The Faculty. I'm thinking like you've got a very sort of adorable, feminine, you wish to protect final girl style Elijah Wood, pre-Frodo. But you've also got a very sort of tall, masculine, muscly, ripped abs, topless, shirtless, occasionally Josh Hartnett. So you kind of have the both options there.
That's a film that's got a male protagonist that's not feminized. 30 Days of Night or whatever it's called.
Oh, that film. Absolute glory.
Again, it's one of those ones where he's not vulnerable. He's not distracted. We're talking about men.
He's not. Let's veer off. It was Josh Hartnett that did it. So yeah, you had the vulnerability factor, the likability factor. I feel I'm forgetting another one, Poe.
Nope, I'm also blanking, so I think maybe you covered it.
Shall we strawman devil's advocate you?
Oh yeah. Sex appeal. I mean, obviously.
No, it's tats and misogyny.
We like to see women get murdered. Is that it?
Yes,
because we hate them.
Yes.
No, you're right. I take it all back.
Someone had to say it.
Horror is about punishing transgressions, so therefore it wants to punish women for just wanting to shag around.
Yeah. Well, that's It Follows, isn't it? Or one reading of it.
Yeah, it's I feel like I had to put it out there, but you still come across this reading of no, it's about seeing women suffer, and it's like.
I think the trouble is that only makes sense if you just gloss over and ignore the fact that there's a final girl who survives, and normally she's coming last after a whole variety of men who've been done away with in quite brutal ways.
Yeah, I was just want to say about the Dario Argento. I can't remember which film he often cast his own daughter, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong, in his movies. You're correct. And she would often get murdered in brutal ways. That even though I don't subscribe to this idea of horror being like a living out our fantasy of wanting to mutilate women, I did think that was a bit weird that he would cast his own daughter in to be a brutal murder victim.
You've got to ask what that relationship is like.
Yeah, he was just trying to help her career get off the ground.
Yeah,
anyone has to think.
It's kind of infamous, but I haven't looked into it, but it's fascinating. I mean, the Hitchcock blondes are sort of bizarre enough, but the Argento family cameos are maybe just. I stick to the Sam Raimi family cameos. That's a much more wholesome area, just Sam and Ted palling around on the Evil Dead set. That's no weird connotations about that whatsoever.
The Shining is another one I think of where the protagonist. I mean, there's not like one protagonist of The Shining. I read the book recently. I absolutely loved it, but I think it almost is like it's like you don't even know who to identify with. Like on each watching, I feel like I identify with a different person. But from the wife's point of view, Wendy, I think that I was kind of thinking about The Shining. The most frightening thing, in real life, almost for a lot of women, is the idea that the most dangerous man in your life is your husband, and especially one that's if he's down on his luck and unemployed and an alcoholic. Like that's actually a really real situation that a lot of women find themselves in. But then also there's a little boy who is even more vulnerable even than Wendy. Like he can't even wield a sword and like stab at his dad's hand. And he's in the book it really comes across how he's all the way up to the end feeling very ambivalent about his father and not knowing like really if he should be afraid of him or all of this. But weirdly that film does make the father into a protagonist as well, even though he ultimately becomes the aggressor. So I don't know what quite to make of that. I think it doesn't really follow a typical sort of hero's journey arc, especially with sort of multiple character views interplaying with each other.
I think Kubrick deliberately aims to confound us with that.
Yeah, and Doctor Sleep. Did you ever talk about Doctor Sleep on this show?
Not on here. I really liked it the first time. I broadly liked it a lot the first time. I had some sort of major quibbles in the second half where I felt like the film dropped 20 IQ points.
Basically, yeah. I wasn't a fan, but you can see there where I think the Danny grown up doesn't make a very good protagonist for that reason, that he's perhaps not vulnerable enough. Like he's not only an adult man, but he also has psychic powers that gives him kind of an edge against whatever he has to come up against. So they have to cast this sort of child girl to be there to be in danger on his behalf, really.
The book, have you read the book? So so she's a character much more strongly throughout the book. She feels a lot less shoehorned in the novel than she does in the film. And so you kind of care about her from the I believe from memory that the novel actually starts with her birth, and focuses on her for the first few chapters, and then goes into Danny, and you actually also see a lot more of like what's happened to Danny growing up and how he's battled with the kind of generational trauma and like the sort of legacy of what happened to him at the Overlook. And it works really, really well. And I was so looking forward to the film, and the film just didn't really live up to the novel. I definitely need to read The Shining because I've never read it, but
oh yeah, it's brilliant.
But it is also like, given that Doctor Sleep is a Stephen King novel, the ending goes a bit loopy, but from memory, it kind of almost slightly redeems his dad a bit, but in quite a nice way. So I recommend the read. But yeah, the ending is a very Stephen King ending.
As always, take the ending with a pinch of salt. Well, I think it's a pretty strong topic opener, and I'd like to argue with you more, but you're right. So, gosh darn it, there's no controversy out of that. I mean, I had to devil's advocate you, but it's pretty weak stuff. Yeah, it's a good position. It's a good lead-in for this film in particular, and because you talked about the sort of evolutionary, deeper psychological thought processes going on there, and I should say processes and not processes, because I know I could feel like Haven was just sort of twitching in the background, like
indeed.
But also, oh sorry, Poe, go ahead.
I was just going to say that introducing the next topic, I know that's your job, but there is something very primal about It Follows, in my opinion, that feeling of being hunted by not by an intelligent sort of being, but almost by a sort of an animalistic hunter. That's the feeling it evokes for me, anyway.
Hey, Gatsby. That's perfect timing. Yeah, let's delve into that a bit. I realise I probably didn't say it at the start here, but there were just some films that I thought I really want to hear women's perspective on. But Anne Gatsby's perspective on, obviously. There have been a few films I've reviewed where I've just felt like a point hasn't maybe been carried across because that perspective was lacking. I mean, I'd like to. We're long past the 2016 everyone is just humans guys, and now we're in a nice healthy there is a general women's viewpoint and there is a general men's viewpoint, and sometimes you really want to hear the women's viewpoint to really get behind what's going on. So I've picked a few films where I felt...
Hello, Gatsby.
That cat.
Sorry, I'll go on mute until he's calmed down.
That's okay. That's okay. There's just a few films where I felt it could really shine by having explicitly just women talking about it. And on a second, if we do a second women's arc, I might just then bolster that by throwing in random horror films and just seeing what happens going randomly with it. What are women going to think of Jason Takes Manhattan, you know?
False advertising.
Something I don't know if you got any statistics or anything with the films that you've chosen for this month, but I do think it's worth mentioning that many of these films are written and directed by men, and although that doesn't, they often are able to convey the female experience, to use one phrase, surprisingly well, considering that. But I think for that reason, we shouldn't preclude men having an interesting insight onto female experience, given that these films are made by men and they have said something meaningful that speaks to women. It seems that that men, at least occasionally, can interpret the female way of thinking and the way of life rather well, I'd argue.
That is a fair old point there. I think, oh gosh, is it everything? I do believe it's everything I've chosen does have a male director.
Absolute state of you.
What do you want? Jack and Diane?
No, I take it back.
Mean Girls was written and directed by a woman and based on a book by a woman. So I think it's got a. That's the only good film I can think of that has a good female writer and director. To be honest.
On a slight tangent, I think the book it's based on is actually an anthropological study of high school. It wasn't even a novel.
It's practically elite theory for teenage girls.
Nice.
I really want you to do that elite theory and Mean Girls video. I'm so keen.
Yeah, we will. I just think to wait for all the women to do their movie homework, because, like I said, they never do their homework.
Oh, a pain. I can't complain. I can't. My panel are very good. I could. Well, you only need women. I can offer you chaps, but they do their homework, but they don't belong in Women's Hour, unfortunately.
Might have to take the topic myself.
All right. Well, shall we move into It Follows then? I think we'll be efficient. 3 minutes ahead of schedule. All right, folks. We're going to talk about It Follows. We're going to talk about it in some depth. We are going to unpack it and give you the definitive meaning behind the film. You will need no other explanation because ours will be 100% solid, and you can take that to the bank and buy it for $1, guaranteed. And also, I know this should be a hit because I've been looking up its reviews on Rotten Tomatoes, where we got an unnamed person saying 1.5 stars. I almost never write reviews, but this has to be one of the most fake reviewed movies of all time. It wasn't scary. The ghosts can be shot, ? Teenagers having sex to pass on the demon to someone else like an STD. The growing best of all time reviews were obviously paid reviews, or else we weren't watching the same movie. Thank God I didn't pay to see it in a theatre. I almost fell asleep as it was. How much did you get paid for your review?
I haven't left a review on Rotten Tomatoes, but yeah, I'm still waiting for my check.
I feel I should express a moment of pride. As you say, Mr. GB, yes, the chat is loyal. A heck of a lot of the chat did their homework. I might actually get a poll going. But first, just on the off chance that one of you lovely folks has turned up here or on the replay for a long discussion of a film you've not seen, which I'm going to be honest, I do as well. 6 hours watching reviews of Multiverse of Madness. Never even watched the trailer.
I think we can leave the ending out of bounds just in case there is anyone who haven't watched it. But the rest of it, I think, is basically the premise. And well, I don't know.
That sounds good to me. All right. Unless you have a burning desire to summarize quickly what the film is about in the time it takes to pour a pint of Guinness, I can go ahead.
I think over to you with your barmaiding history.
All right. So It Follows was made in 2014 by a fairly independent filmmaker called David Robert Mitchell, who had only one other film to his credit and one film since. It's very much an independent... John, I will post the poll. Just give me a second, my friend. Got a Guinness summary to pass here. And it's going to spill over the glass now. Look what you've done. Anyway... We have a standard enigmatic horror opening where a woman in very little clothes and yet red heels is being hunted down a suburban street by something that none of us can actually see. And she meets a grisly end. This is your good foreboding. We later find out that the similar fate will... a similar doom will start hunting our lead character, Jay, or Jamie, and her group of friends will try and help her evade this threat, which is effectively, let's call it a curse, although we'll analyse it in some greater depth. It's a curse that she contracts from sleeping with a man that she does not know very well. She has to try and work out how to evade this threat and work out if she can possibly rid herself of it. And it all transpires in a fairly dreamy, hazy manner. As for the more specific nature of the curse, it is a being that follows her at walking pace wherever she goes. It is effectively relentless. Only she can see it, or other people who've had the curse, and it can take on a myriad number of forms, often of people that she knows. But it doesn't speak, and it just seeks to reach her, and when it reaches her, it will finish her off and then work its way back down the chain of people who have had the curse. It's kind of hard doing this Guinness review. I lump people with it, but when you're doing it, it's a little tricky. Did I get our main things without revealing the ending?
Yeah, I'd say so.
Okay.
I also already disagree with chat.
Oh, chat. Okay, I'm going to put a poll in, but Poe, I remember you said you were keen to talk about this a while ago, so another reason I'm so happy to have you. While I'm doing a poll, would you like to describe why you were so keen on this film?
Okay. It's one of my favourite horror films, as I described in, I think, my first appearance on Double Feature Horror Show. It was one of my top 4 or top 5 horror films of all time. And if I had to boil it down to what I love about this film, it's the concept. It's a terrifying concept. It scares me every time I watch it, to the point that I don't even think you can spoil this film, because to describe the concept is it doesn't really do it justice. It's just terrifying to be pursued by this walking pace, absolutely relentless curse. I like the word curse. And to have no way to be rid of it permanently. It can only be passed on temporarily. But before we go into that, the other thing that I love about this film is the soundtrack. That's just the soundtrack is written by Disaster Piece, who some people know as the composer for Fez, which is an indie game that was very popular. I liked that game, and then when I heard that Disaster Piece, the composer for that game, wrote the soundtrack for a movie, I was kind of like, huh? Like, what? And then it works really well in the film, but it kind of sounds... The music in the film sounds very kind of 70s, 80s synths, very John Carpenter, very Halloween, and yet also very modern modern retro, if that makes sense. It's like the game Fez, where it's a sort of throwback game, but in a very modern way. So it's a brilliant soundtrack. I love the soundtrack of Fez and for this, and the music really enhances the frightening parts. It enhances the chilled out parts where the friends are just hanging out together and sort of enjoying their innocence, their teenage fun times, just hanging out, being good pals. And that's what I like about It Follows. It's just it's scary, and it is kind of sweet. And as you said, Proper Horror Show, it's kind of dreamy. I watched the I didn't watch the film. I watched the director's commentary, not director's commentary, the commentary on the Blu-rays, not the director. It's by two film buffs, like film lecturers. I just love this cover, by the way. This is a Blu-ray cover. And those guys, cool. I have to say, the analysis on the commentary of this Blu-ray is not up to the standard of the analysis on Double Feature Horror Show, I have to say. Even with Harry and talking about Family Guy half the time. These guys were so pretentious, and I'm so glad I never studied film, because if these are the standards of the lecturers, I don't think you'd learn much.
I know we're trying to be efficient, but this is kind of kicking one of my pet theories right in the guts. So I really want details on it. I've kind of felt like commentaries are the area where physical media could massively profit. Like literally, commentaries are just audio tracks. Are so cheap to do. You could pay any number of random internet weirdos, wink wink, to produce commentary tracks for your film. And I've seen a few where they've done it. I'm trying to think of a non-shameful example, but all I can think of is Vampire Hunter D, where, there was no one available to do it, so they got someone who's a bit of a nerd to talk about it. The Great Escape DVD as well.
Someone who's a bit of a nerd is the best person to do a commentary, because it's so often commentaries, if you get the director or one of the actors to do it, they just talk about like how great everyone else's performance was. Like, oh yeah, the sound design here is so great. Oh yeah, she's so great in this. Like they're there just to be nice to their friends, and they just tell you like all the nice things about each other, which is kind of wholesome, but not really. It doesn't add much to the film.
Yeah, they're too close to it basically. So exactly as you say, they can't give an honest commentary because they're guarding relationships, and unless you get like rare ones like Blade Trinity, where Ryan Reynolds was big enough to start talking smack about Wesley Snipes being offset stoned all day. You get
why didn't he open his eyes?
That commentary track was illuminating. What can I say? Yeah, so I feel just like random weirdo enthusiasts who can talk a lot more. The time for that is now. Like, people are already producing these, so bung them on your DVD, and you'd have so much more variety, I think. But what went wrong on this one with your... did you say they were academics?
One of them definitely was. I can't remember who the other one was, but I believe so. Oh, sorry, you're asking me what went wrong. Sorry.
Yeah,
I thought you were getting into a point. I don't want to get too much into the commentary, because really we're here to talk about the film. And my first 2 or 3 viewings of this film on this Blu-ray were great. And it was only because I've seen it a few times already that I decided to go for the commentary. But they're very into their symbology. Talking about that, when I guess I like to talk about a little bit about the symbolic parts, but also about the technical details and the performances and everything, not just what does it mean, And I was not really impressed with their theories. They didn't actually go into the STD detail, but I think maybe that would be a good place to start, because I think on a really basic level, it is sexually transmitted, the curse, and yet it's not, that theme is not lampshaded at all in any other part of the film. So the character's attitude towards sex is pretty positive, and they take it quite casually. They don't have any. There's not really much negativity around how they talk about sex or how they approach it in that way that if it was a film about the dangers of casual sex, you'd see a lot more of that. If it was just about STDs. Something that the commentators kept pointing out over and over is these, these motifs of innocence. Things like the way that Jay is like just she plays with blades of grass or little bits of flowers, and you kind of see these POV shots with her hand just sort of absentmindedly fiddling with things the way that children do. The way that her friends are playing Old Maid, they're playing Go Fish with each other, just sitting around watching TV. There's this, you see often these sort of suburban children playing in the background. There's one scene going to the park where she's afraid of the being pursued by the curse, and she runs straight to the children's park on a bike, on a child's bike. So I was kind of convinced, at least by that level of analysis, at least, where there is this recurring theme of lost innocence. If the film was about sex, I think it's more about the loss of innocence than it is about literally getting an STD.
That was a swerve onto a territory where I'm suddenly nodding again. I was like, oh, whoa, this is a take I didn't expect. Yeah, I think I'd probably think a bit differently about how the film talks about sex. So I think this is kind of the meat of it. Is we'll be talking about what this film is saying, what It Follows is trying to portray, and I think the end of innocence in a way that's not exactly. The beauty of it is it's not condemnatory, but it's also not portraying the loss of innocence and the entry into the world as a sexual being as something uncomplicated. It kind of made me think, you recently read The Case Against the Sexual Revolution. I'm correct, yeah?
Yeah.
Did anything about that book make you think of this film, or vice versa, maybe?
I started to think about, if you wanted to go into specific plot points, Jay, being so just exhausted and desperate, driven to desperation by the curse, she does attempt to pass it on, first with a young man in her life who the commentators on the Blu-ray said that he looked like Johnny Depp from Nightmare on Elm Street, just because he's sort of wearing a leather jacket and he's got that long brown hair. So that's why I'm thinking of him now. I think his name is... Do you remember the name of the character? Is he called Rob? Greg, yeah. So she tries to pass it on to Greg, and then later to some other random guys, just to temporarily try to get rid of it. And these are not really sort of romantic encounters at all. And the way that she acts after those things have happened, and during, you see they don't give her any. It's like she's seeking some release, some reprieve, and yet she's still haunted by. She knows it's coming for her. There is no real relief, from what she's cursed by. Innocence once lost can't be regained. And although the first time she catches the curse isn't her losing her virginity at all, it did make me think about the way that we're getting some
We've got the most appropriate bot that I've ever seen.
Yeah, that they can tell what we're talking about. I don't know how they know, but the bots can tell.
Gosh darn.
But to get really into the sexual revolution and its consequences for a disaster for women, I think that is what Louise Perry describes in The Case Against the Sexual Revolution, is this way that women who find themselves damaged by unhealthy sex, I want to say, not always abusive, just women who have not had good experiences with sex, they will it's a kind of a cope in an attempt to convince themselves that it's not as important, that sex isn't important, that there is no such thing as innocence. They'll start to just devalue it, and they'll pursue more and more sexual partners rather than, some women of course will hide away from sexual partners altogether, and become less sexual, but some women go the other rate and they become more sexual and they just keep pursuing more of these kind of experiences, trying to get one that works out right. The kind of definition of insanity. Like, they'll just keep trying until they find a sexual experience that actually works, that is, doing what it's supposed to and making them feel happy. So it's a really sad state of affairs at the moment. That book kind of lays it out in stark detail, where we basically have a lot of young women who are very unhappy with, and they have a lot of regrets around their sexual past that don't really have much to do with STDs or even pregnancy or abuse, but just unsatisfying emotional experiences that they
back off the bedpost. Sorry, I interrupted.
Go on. No, that's fine. I was petering out anyway. I was hoping someone would interrupt.
Excellent. Well, I'm good at that. Because that basically what you were describing there is kind of why I don't see the film as being necessarily about STDs specifically. I think it is much more about not so much hookup culture, but just the kind of sexual culture that we're living in and that we were living in at the time, and that is sort of, if anything, even more prevalent now. And I think you can kind of see that sort of etched throughout the film in the way that Jay's attitude and experience of sex changes. That she starts off, the first part of her in the film. Hang on a sec. I muted to cough because no one needs to hear my lungs implode. That she starts off kind of quite dreamy, and she's sort of getting ready for a date, and she's putting on a pretty dress and some jewelry, and they go out, for essentially dinner and a movie that doesn't quite pan out the way they planned, and then they go for a second date. So it's like she hasn't even sort of shagged on the first date. She's sort of holding off, and then but it's clearly something that she kind of, she's not a virgin, but she sort of holds it in reserve. And then as the film goes on, she just gets, like, you kind of see that she's becoming more and more emotionally disconnected. And I think some of the kind of camera work does that as well, where you can almost see her dissociating from sex, that she's kind of, there's bits like when there's a scene in a swimming pool and you just sort of see her body but not her head, and then later on you just see her head but not her body. Or like the scene that Horrorshow has just put on screen and has now taken off again, of after she sort of tried to pass on the curse the first time to her friend Greg. And you just have a shot of her afterwards just lying there. And even while it's happening, she's clearly not really participating in the sort of sexual act, and she's just getting more and more kind of disconnected from herself and disconnected from what's kind of sex and romance clearly held for her at the start. And so that, to me, feels like a sort of example of why the film is not... The curse itself is sexually transmitted, but to me it feels like what sex is becoming in our culture, of this very kind of meaningless, joyless, connectionless thing. And how that just, if it does kind of follow you and it haunts you, those sorts of trails of negative, not traumatic, but just negative experiences. I hope everyone's feeling cheerful and hasn't, offed themselves while I've been chatting.
I've got beautiful imagery on chat. Will be fine. Chat here comes here for the deeper view. Can I season that with some autism? All right.
Always.
So you didn't laugh when I said it earlier, so I'll try and see what people think. There's one of the beauties of this is that it's not just taking a really firm position. It's nuanced, and there's kind of an arc in this. It's not all doom and gloom, which we can tell from the sex positions that Jamie takes throughout the movie. And
I'd forgotten this. Oh no.
No, this is good. This is good. Trust me. All right. So we start off. Why am I doing this? We start off with her on a date she's really excited about. She gets dressed up for, and she goes in the back of the car, and she's cowgirl, very much in control, on top, and feeling her oats. And then it all goes wrong. She's going through the trauma. She's got the curse. She's locked herself away. The next time she has sex, it's with Greg, just trying to pass it on. And she goes on her back, missionary, and afterwards you see her like this. So she's kind of taken what you might call a more submissive position, and she's not engaged with it. You can tell from her face she's viewing it as a kind of functionary thing, and she's just wanting to know if she's gotten rid of the curse. We don't even see what she does with the 3 guys on the boat, some kind of Chinese finger trap Eiffel Tower scenario. We don't know. It's not important.
I think it's the fact that it's not shown at all. I think is such a great. I mean, it moves the plot along, of course. It's great for pacing, but it also it's the ultimate form of her disassociating from the sexes. We don't even get to see it. It's all just completely inferred. It's almost like she can't even bear to think about it. It was such an not even a horrific experience, but just such a forgettable thing she just doesn't want to think about anymore.
Yeah, exactly. Brilliant. Yeah, we don't need to see it. We know what's going on, and it's almost like she doesn't want us to see it either. But we know what happened, and it I don't know, in some ways it's my favorite scene because of how much restraint it shows. And then the next time, after they've gone through everything in the finale, she then does make love again, and there's some interesting symbolism there, and she is on top again, which is almost like a character arc.
There's character arc through sexual positions.
Yes, she's regained some control.
Well, that is an autistic analysis, if you wouldn't mind me confirming your... I'd like to point out that the... take away the curse from this film. Just look at the first couple of scenes. And the first guy that she has sex with, who she catches it from... She thinks he's a really sweet guy. Like, they have a very sweet date, and he's nice to her. She really likes him. She tells her sister that she likes him, and then that's the experience that I think is quite common with dating. Is that you go on a date with the guy who you like, and it makes you happy, and you're kind of anticipating where is this relationship going. And they have a nice date, and she's being all whimsical and talking about how much she loved the idea of dates as a child, looking forward to being an adult woman who could go on dates, and like she's almost saying like, oh, this is like a dream come true, this is such a wonderful date to be on right now, and then it's just completely flipped around and the worst possible outcome happens. But take out the curse and just think about what that date is like for her. Finding out that the guy that she really liked, who she thought she might have, might be her boyfriend, he doesn't even have the name that he gave her. He doesn't live at the address that he said he lived at. And the sex for him was not a genuine expression of desire and affection, but it was just a completely one and done, completely practical, just a... what do you call it? Just a means to an end for him.
Utilitarian.
He wasn't interested in her at all. And I think that is the experience of a lot of sort of women in hookup culture, is that they go in expecting romance and expecting a human connection, and they end up with a guy who's able to act it out for long enough to get to what he wants, and then just ghosts her.
Yeah. There's some information we get later on about... She just sort of casually drops when Paul is asking her, and Paul is a kind of needier, younger dude who is so someone's already called him a beta. So I don't think it's exactly... I don't want to be harsh to the guy, but...
He's a very nice guy,
you
could
is.
say.
Yeah.
Hashtag nice guy.
I think that the film does also give him a little bit of a creepy glow and not hide it, which is kind of... I like that. It's more complex. And it's more honest, I think. So Paul is asking her why, when she passed the curse on to just try and get rid of it, why she went with Greg, who is the more masculine guy, and not him. And he was trying to frame it in this kind of like, I'd have helped you out, I'd have done you a favor. You could have asked me. I'm a helpful kind of guy. We can talk about Paul for a while. He's interesting, but Jamie just drops that she slept with Greg in high school already, and it wasn't a big deal. So it's like she's already kind of experienced, but it does feel like she was having that. It adds a sort of extra level onto the fact that she was making an effort with the guy that she, ultimately didn't even know the name of. Like she was going in a bit more optimistic, which I think feeds into this idea that they are living in an era when, sex is kind of everywhere, and it is kind of cheapened.
And you can see
and
that
they
as
have
well.
to cope with that. Sorry, wifey, go ahead.
There's a couple of moments where, like, they talk about things like her and Paul finding a load of porno magazines when they were kids and flipping through them. And there's something else as well where they make a couple of references to essentially the kind of adult world of sex intruding on their childhood in ways that are probably actually sort of inappropriate. Well, definitely inappropriate, but sort of everyone has a story like that, so it doesn't seem like it's that inappropriate or wrong or weird.
Just in this shot, can you see the way that Paul is sitting? It's very childish, like the way that he's just got his legs up to his chin like that. That's not just Paul. Like I think a lot of the teenagers in this film, they often adopt this this return to childhood sort of posture. In that, just one of those things I was mentioning about the return to innocence that these. It's like these teenagers they want to go back to that safety and innocence of childhood.
Yeah, they also seem to exist in a sort of an era where it's very deliberately hard to tell what era they're in. They're constantly watching retro 50s horror movies and sci-fi movies on old CRT TVs.
I think the director said that was to make it seem more dreamlike, I believe.
I mean, it worked. They do seem out of time, and disconnected from the world in a major way. Like, it seems to me very knowing that the parents are always so distant from everything.
Yeah.
Which also feels kind of childlike. Like from the child's perspective, the adults are in a completely different world. Although the
adults can't help, and they don't help. They don't understand what's going on. They don't attempt to help. They're just they're completely absent from the film.
Waifu, you were saying a lot about the mum when we were watching. Do you want to?
I'm trying to remember. The main thing I was noticing was that she doesn't really speak. She has maybe 2 or 3 lines, and the few interactions or sort of moments she's on screen, she's normally drinking something or near a large bottle of wine. So she's kind of clearly an alcoholic and clearly just completely disconnected from her kids. And, that it's sort of things like the younger sister is a little bit worried that her mum will notice that she smokes, but probably won't because she'll be drunk anyway. And they're just sort of existing in this world where the adults who are supposed to be there protecting them are just completely out of it. And yeah, I can't remember what else I was saying really, other than I just sort of you sort of realize that there's no real. She's not protecting her daughter. She's not there to help her. She kind of vaguely tries to comfort her with a really kind of creepy back rub later on, and that's about it. What else was I saying anything else? Because I feel like I may have forgotten what I was saying.
I think that was the main thing. There was also an issue like fathers come in later in a very nightmarish context. And then there's the mother who is also more active is Greg's mother.
She's too active.
In a later way, but maybe that's taking us aside. I have this screen cap up just because while we're talking about the ubiquity of sex as it relates to our analysis of what the heck is going on here. I can't get over the fact that Greg, even though it was an emergency, and not Greg,
Paul.
Jeff, his name is revealed to be
Jeff. The Jeff who's Hugh to begin with, but the original passer on of the curse.
Yeah, that's good. The guy who takes her on a date and then gives her the curse. He's hiding away in here, and she mentions she knows where he lives, which is how they get here. But I'm like, she has really low standards. I'm just saying.
Yeah, how did he know? How did she know that? I think that's weird. It's never explained.
They do mention when the police are interviewing her. You hear one of them say, "Oh, she gave us his address, but it's clearly a fake address, or we checked it out and it's fake." So he must have said, "Oh yeah, I live on this street," or whatever. So the way I coloured in the blanks with just, "Oh, he said I live the other side of the city on this street called whatever," and she just took that as read. Because she doesn't have a smartphone to check and probably wouldn't have been.
She says, if I recall, I've seen the outside of the house, but I've never gone in.
Then she's got really low standards.
Well, yeah, because it's in this film, by the way, shot in Detroit, and Detroit, I'm going to assume it's not just it was cheap. It's meant to be a stand-in for a kind of loss of innocence. You know, a city that once had amazing promise is now, far from its prime. They really take time showing you so much of the area that's kind of abandoned or decayed or derelict.
I watched Barbarian this week, which is set in a similar area of Detroit. This extremely run down, not just abandoned but completely destroyed neighborhood of Detroit. I don't know if there's many of these neighborhoods, but just completely not just abandoned, but then sort of occupied by squatters who it's like a bomb's gone off. Like the whole neighborhood is it's falling down. So that's what this scene reminded me of. I'd watched Barbarian earlier in the weekend. That was a good film. I recommend that to anyone wanting to watch a spooky film this season. Something that came out recently.
Nice. I was going to ask. I've heard mixed reviews. Okay, that's good. That's good. So your man Jeff he's hiding up in here, and I kind of like the practicalities of how he's rigged the place to be curse proof, because the film does put a fair bit of thought into how do you avoid being killed by the curse, but it also doesn't overly nitpick, which I really like. I think it got the balance right,
I like just to go on to the mechanical level of the film. All of the rules about how the curse operates are set out in that one scene where he basically just he does all the exposition dump at the beginning in a way that's not subtle at all, but is still elegant and simple. I love that. Like all of the rules. It's not like a horror film where they have to discover what are the rules of this thing? How do we beat it? It's all just there right in that one scene. He says it all, and I really like that. But this thing about setting up sort of things that will create noise when the thing comes in, sort of just basic territory protection techniques.
Yeah, I love those details. And later you see that Jay sets up the same thing. But there's also an interesting thing in that, especially when she's approaching the boat, she moves in a way that reminds me of the creature. She kind of takes on both aspects. Anyway, those are higher-minded points. I only have the screenshot to point out the fact that I found it so weird that Jeff took along pornos and put a bookmark in them.
Well, I don't think it was a bookmark. I think he had. I think that was a photo of his girlfriend in a sort of a grossly romantic way, because he wanted to be thinking about her while he was looking at his porn. Is that weird?
I don't know. I can't.
That's how I read
it. I paused on it. And I was like, why is this in there? Did you need to remember that page, sir, so you didn't forget the plot? It's weird, but it does also fit the analysis of, the sex is absolutely ubiquitous. You can't escape it. So even here in the midst of solving the mystery, Paul sits down to peruse the material.
But he's not embarrassed when she catches him. It's not like it's not like a Goofy movie. It's like, oh no, I wasn't looking. I was just he's just like, oh yeah, hey Jay, I'm just looking at this. Like, oh look what I found. They are kind of quite grown up in that sense. Like, or they're just that comfortable with each other that he knew that she wasn't going to misunderstand what he was up to.
But also to me, I see that as a kind of, there's almost a deadness there. That they've just got such a kind of matter-of-fact approach to sex, perhaps, that it just doesn't carry any, I don't know, it almost doesn't carry any weight with them. And that almost seems to be part of the problem. Or I'm possibly hammering this nail a bit too heavily.
Yeah, I'd probably lean that way as well, in that just they're a bit desensitized to it. You know, there's just so many casual drops, and just David Robert Mitchell did such a good job. Just he'll scan around and there's like randomly people making out. Just when they go to the college, and then they go to Jeff's, I think it's Jeff's old college as well. They've just got people very prominently physically engaged with each other. And even in the hospital, I was accused of reaching on this one, I'll admit. But when you scan by, they've got male-female pairings of doctors in a kind of close way, and I was like, oh, okay. Are they building up to that?
Slightly unsettlingly, in the third window they scan past, it's a man and a child, and then you have to, when Horrorshow is going, they're sort of indicating sort of sexual relationships between these two windows, and they're indicating families and connection and how people are kind of warmed together in all these windows that we're seeing.
Yeah, they did later show the family. So after the kid, it was a family, which was a bit more wholesome, and I thought, okay, I've reached on this one. But it definitely showed the hospital staff being very sort of fraternisy with each other.
And I would say the other thing with that is that it shows all of those four windows in various different ways show quite warm connections. And the final window that the camera pans to is the window in which Greg and Jay are going at it. And it's sort of, there's a couple of sort of moments at the start where it looks like she's sort of getting into it, but gradually just her face falls and she just becomes kind of passive. And
it looks like she's in the movie logic, she's watching the door, expecting at any moment for the curse to walk in. But that look on her face, that dissociation is can easily be read as a more sort of realistic commentary kind of analysis.
For sure.
But, other than that, I did have another point, if I can just remember what it was. I wanted to mention that the way that the backgrounds are used in this film, us, the viewer, is constantly watching, just as Jay is watching for someone walking towards her. There's a few times in the film where background extras are used in a really cool way, where there'll just be one person in a crowd who's like walking directly towards the camera, making us, the viewer, feel like we're being stalked a little bit. And it's usually just nobody. It's just like a random person who happens to be walking towards the camera. But I'm sure it wasn't an accident, and it does have this great kind of, it gives you that feeling of paranoia that Jay is feeling.
You're always second guessing.
Yeah, it's one of the, oh sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say any I was about to say any scene where there's people in the background, but to be honest, by the end of the film, any scene, you're just raking the background looking for movement. And because it's got such a kind of steady walk, it is quite a recognizable walk. And like this scene, which I hadn't noticed the first two times I saw the film, but this time, there's a chap in the background by the tree who is very much just walking straight towards the camera. And it's that sort of, that could just be a bloke wanting to get out of the rain or head into this restaurant, but you're constantly kind of going, what if that's the curse? What if that's it?
It's one of those things that makes this incredibly rewatchable, because you don't know the rule at this point. You've got the camera angle set up to tell you, okay, the thing in the background, that's significant. Mitchell is training the audience to look out for them in a certain way, but he hasn't announced the rule yet. And once he's announced the rule and played with it a couple of times, he then sort of has a joke with you, like with the fake out when they actually meet Jeff. And Jeff is panicking over someone who is basically an extra. And it's a nice bit of comedy in there, like, yes, you caught the rule, but you're being goofy. And it's lovely because for me, it doesn't wreck the tone. It's like a nice bit of comedy, but it isn't, yo guys, I'm so ironic and clever. I'm not affected by things I watch. I don't care. I'm not emotionally invested in anything. It doesn't do that thing, so I just love it. It has a well-timed joke that we can appreciate.
So it's probably one of the funnier moments of this film. I can't think of many, to be honest. I'm sure if you've seen this film more than once, that you'll have caught the unspoken rule about the curse, which is that the shape that it takes is, I believe, always in a state of undress, either naked or in underwear or in sleeping clothes. So we know that these fake outs are just fake outs. It's just a sense of paranoia, really, that they represent. I'm pretty certain for that reason that this is not the thing. This is not what was chasing her. This is just an extra. And similarly, the only one that breaks that rule, as far as I know, is right at the beginning where they're pointing out people in the crowd, and he points out a girl in a yellow dress who Jay cannot see, which is how he knows that it's the thing following him. I always love that scene because we don't see what he sees. We just see the fear that it brings up in him, and it could be walking towards him, or sometimes it doesn't always walk. Sometimes it just does stay still and stares, which is also creepy. But I've always wondered, the girl in the yellow dress, was she wearing like a night dress or some kind of lingerie, or was that the one exception where she really was just dressed up in a normal yellow dress? Just a random point.
I hadn't put together that they're always in a state of undress, because I'm relying on a few times where I do believe the extra is the thing.
I'm going to need to watch it a fourth time now.
So watching for the background appearances of the thing is something that gives you so much rewatchability. And the other one is the form the thing takes. It can sometimes seem like an absolute randomer, but it rarely is. So what the most obvious one is at the end, which I think I'll skip over for the moment. But I'll show you a couple of them, and I don't know if you caught these, because I only got one of them on the last viewing, which was, I think, my fourth viewing. Weirdly, I was really down on it on my third viewing, and then the fourth one picked it up again. I am a balanced individual. I've got to find it here. Sorry, it's number 5. Where are you? Got it. Right. So I feel this is representative of how hard this is to notice. You see the creepy kid on the left?
You think that's the child who crawls through the...
That is the
hole.
crawling child.
It is, because after you've seen him crawling through the
hole in the beach house.
The hole, thank you. There's a shot later on where they're back at Jay's house, and that kid goes cycling past on a bike, and you have just like a split-second view of his face, and it's the same face.
Yeah.
I hadn't caught that one.
Same darn kid. Well, it's quite hard. This is her granddad. Susan, that is censored. Well, you can only get that if you look at her family photos, which they give you a close-up on, which for the granddad before they show him, which is to train you. And spoilers for the end, guys. Spoilers. They next show you the family photo with the father after you've seen the father in the curse form. I always thought this was quite Magritte-like. René Magritte has lots of gorgeous paintings of the outside of the building with something standing on it. But Magritte would also contrast the sky. So he'd have like the sky would be nighttime, but the building would be lit as if it were full day, or vice versa. And they obviously haven't done that here, but there's something about the absurdity and uncanniness of the figure just standing on the roof and you never find out why. That really makes me think they were inspired by Magritte.
Why didn't he walk? Why was it up there? Like, why didn't it follow her? Like, when I was watching it this time, my husband said that like maybe the curse is just fucking with her. Like, it really does. Like, it doesn't just want to get you; it also wants to terrify you, and sometimes just to stand there and scare you.
Oh, totally. I think we know that it demonstrates intelligence. It uses tools occasionally. You know, it uses a rock to smash a window.
That's its one trick. It does that. It rings the doorbell first, but it always just goes to the rock right after.
Yeah, it strikes me that realistically, we don't have your local demon expert who has a dusty tome. You know, right there in Sunnydale Library all along. Thank goodness. In fairness, Giles would have curated that. It's not a plot problem.
Yeah.
But their only source of information about it is what they can deduce and what Jeff tells them. And Jeff only got the information from the person who gave him the curse and legged it. So it's a nice, very believable in-world explanation for why they just don't have the info.
I wondered what you made of the frequent nakedness of the curse, the pursuer. Whether they're in their nightclothes or not, but they're often, like I said, in a state of undress, like often fully naked or partially naked. The one that breaks, the first one she sees is completely naked walking towards her. The second one looks like it's possibly a prostitute, and that leads me to another rule. Actually, I should come back to where it seems to take the form of people it's killed frequently, which makes me wonder if the one walking towards her in the kitchen, who's kind of urinating on these disgusting socks that it's wearing, is the form of a prostitute who it's been who has killed previously, because you'd think that a prostitute would be the ideal candidate for being killed by this thing.
I'm very glad you asked.
But this sort of obscene form that nakedness takes, like when Jay's having sex, or just in general, her nakedness is never she's never really naked. She's like wrapped up in a blanket. Even when she's in a swimsuit, it's quite a sort of conservative, covered up tank top style of swimsuit. Sex is never associated with nakedness. It's only this obscene, horrible thing that comes across naked. I wondered what you thought of that.
Two thoughts. I can't show it on YouTube because I think it would be over the line, but we have a disheveled, I agree with you, I think prostitute who's, I think, clearly been beaten, and her clothes are torn and she's urinating.
Her front teeth are missing, which is really quite disturbing to see.
It's a nasty detail. So the first thing it makes me think of is it seems quite an obvious callback to The Exorcist. So there's a moment early on when Reagan is first possessed and she comes downstairs to the nice posh party and says something rather offensive, I won't repeat, and then urinates. And it's incredibly unsettling. It's so much more than you ever thought you'd see. And I thought it's a reference to that, for how it would just instantly unsettle you. And then the second is, I think it's that obscenity. It's that going straight into your evolutionary brain of, why are they naked? Why are they vulnerable? But they're coming straight at me. Why are they doing that? They aren't behaving how they should in this state. It puts you on edge, I think. So I think you described it as obscene, and I think that's a really good word.
I just wonder if it tied to our wider themes about sex. It does seem it seems related, but I can't find a connection.
Well, sex isn't eroticized in this. I think the closest you get is that first scene in the car, but even then it's relatively demure. And And I think you could say it's reflexive of a world where the sex is omnipresent, but it's de-romanticized, and therefore the nudity doesn't have any allure to it.
Yeah, no, definitely.
I suppose there's also an element where, given the sort of states of undress and dishevelment and obscenity, it's almost kind of making the bodies themselves quite monstrous. That sort of sex itself is this kind of depersonalized, dissociated act, but the sort of human bodies at the heart of it are just kind of, sort of almost distorted. And I think there's an interesting thing, given that what we were talking about right at the start of the stream about how women are often the protagonists of horror because of their vulnerability and their fragility, or perceived fragility. And it's interesting that because the monster in It Follows is such a shapeshifter, it often takes quite vulnerable forms, but it's all like it's this continuing slow menace. You know, the first time Jay properly sees it sort of on her own, the sighting that essentially confirms to her that it's real and not a lie that Hugh made up, is when the old woman is approaching her sort of across the college.
I find that one of the
park.
scariest, the scariest forms that it takes, just right there in that public place, really like staring at her. I don't know why that unsettles me more than the other ones. Sorry to derail you. Go on.
No, but you're right. I do find that one. I think it's possibly for me. It's partly that it's like the first time that it's confirmed that it's real, almost. But it's that, you know, it takes that form. You know, this sort of old woman. Then later on, it's this beaten up, sort of dishevelled, presumably prostitute. It's the form of a little boy. Like in amongst, there are some various, like the tall man and various kind of like male actors who are obviously quite big and quite strong. But in amongst that, there's a blend of people who are very like would be typically perceived as quite vulnerable and yet are still threatening. I've slightly gone off the point about like the sort of nudity and what role that has to play, but I find it interesting that the monster embodies forms that should be vulnerable and should be not a threat and yet are still terrifying.
I think it's more terrifying in those forms than it is as the tall man or as the little boy.
Yeah, I agreed with you that the first sighting of the old woman just looking so out of place is quite astounding, because it's that first test of is it real or not, and it has to really sell you on that. And then that's when the music from Disaster Piece kicks in, I think, more powerfully than anything else.
She asks the people in the hall. There's other people there. It's got that, you know, at the end of Halloween. That's my favorite scene of Halloween, where she goes and she's knocking on other people's houses. Like, this should be when she's safe. Other people are here. Like, hello, like, I'm here. Help me. And these other people like don't even know what she's talking about. These people in the hallway, they're like, "What? Like, who? You talking to us?" Like, they don't even see it, and it makes it so real and so scary that she's completely alone facing this thing.
Well, there's this weird inversion in It Follows, and I'm sorry, you gave me the perfect segue, if you don't mind. It takes the exact same tropes you see in so many horrors are here in just this completely new context where they work, and they're not a flaw in the story. So for just two examples, the slow-moving threat is a classic. Jason, Michael, slow-moving threat for the dread, great. But in the slashers, and especially Friday the 13th, I'm sorry to say, trouble is their character will move very fast. So they have to then teleport the killer to get that kill in. Whereas It Follows doesn't care about that because it's relentless. It's just one person under threat. And if you got away this time, it's still coming after you. You don't escape, and you're so aware of the dread. And the other one is the bit where the character sees something, but there's nothing there. And, you know, it can feel like a bit of a fake out. It usually is, especially in 80s slashers. But in here, there is an in-story reason for why no one sees something. So just absolute kudos to the world. Bravo to the world building here. It's so well done. And to veer it back onto the sort of the obscene, scary things, I thought the way Greg dies, it's the closest we get to seeing what this creature actually does to you when it catches you. And I wondered, would you like to discuss this scene briefly?
No, I would not. To be honest,
bad luck, waifu.
This makes it a little bit less scary for me. I'll just say that, like, seeing how the thing kills always takes the bite out a little bit of a horror film for me.
For sure. Or like at the end of the film where they've been this big monster and then you see it and you're like, oh wow, your CGI can't really cope with the terror you've created. This obviously manages to avoid that by just having walking extras. Yeah, I think there's an element where actually looking at the sort of the act in progress, as it were, does perhaps take some of the horror away. But I think right up until that point, just the bit that really got me about this scene is that when Jay comes up the stairs and the monster has taken the form of Greg's mum, and she's just hammering on the door, stops, looks blankly at Jay, and like her dressing gown is open, so she's sort of exposing herself, and then carries on hammering on the door, just completely blank, no kind of registering or reacting to what's happening around her. That is quite haunting, and just the sort of this pure kind of animal instinct that as soon as he opens the door, the thing just throws itself on him. That I find quite terrifying. I feel like, yeah, there's an element where once you actually sort of follow Jay and look around the corner of the door at what's happening, it's a little bit South Park. There's a line from South Park I'm thinking of that I probably can't say on YouTube. So it does slightly deflate the tension a bit, perhaps.
I mean, I'll try and defend the film because, okay, possibly I'm a puerile groundling here and I want to see claret. I'll accept that. I'm often guilty of this. I don't think we get a definitive answer of how it kills because we see the aftermath of the first kill and there's no evidence there is a very nasty thing done to the person's leg in a very creative way that sticks in the brain. But it implies that what happens to Greg does not happen here. And we're keeping this light not only for Susan's benefit, but if you haven't seen it, I'd like to think you're curious. But I've got to admit, I do need a little detail. There's been so much mystery and it's been so reserved. Just a little bit of a disturbing detail really helps me as a horror fan. I think I'd possibly feel a little shortchanged if I didn't see something like that. And it was so incredibly horrific. Greg opens the door and you've got that sort of taboo there because he thinks it's his mum, but his mum is in a state of undress, and that then there's that kind of additional obscenity thrown into that. It goes into extremely disturbing territory from there on. But I think it doesn't show you all that much.
The thing I liked about it was the water, just how much, like, how the beasts, the curse, the entity seems to be, like, just exuding with this, like, weird water from its skin, which I thought was just such a weird detail that I kind of enjoyed that. Like, it just adds more, like, mystery on top of the mystery you already had. What is going on? It's so wet.
I mean, the water symbolism is something we could go into genuinely. Have you noticed how many times it appears around water?
I noticed the university lecturers mentioning it on the commentary. Not to compare you to a pretentious university lecturer, but they did mention the water thing. We had a death. Sorry.
It's Chloe's ideal world, pretentious university lecturer.
Well, maybe you'd like the commentary.
I don't get paid to be a pretentious pain in the butt.
Well, they keep talking about this. they keep talking about the water thing without really making a concrete observation. It's just like that's all it takes to be a university film lecturer, is to go, oh yeah, look again, they're using water again. We're like, oh, that's water is the births, the water births, and it also symbolizes death, and it's also life, it's also birth. It's a little bit tiresome, but no, I appreciate there is a lot of water in this film though.
Yeah, I suspect it's mostly because of the end. It strikes me as it's not an accident, basically. Now, how you might interpret that gets very tricky. I don't know about you, but maybe shall we talk about the ending?
Or are we going
sure.
to avoid spoiling?
As part of addressing.
Well, if we're coming close to the end of the stream, then I think people who haven't seen it probably have enjoyed quite enough of us talking about it already. They can switch off now.
All right. I'll throw in one spoiler-free thing that I really wanted to address, and I thought it was so good. I loved it. And it's 2 bits of camera work in this. Now, I've been showing you just completely beautiful imagery from this the whole time. But I thought I'd talk about the camera work as well. So we got this shot here when we are getting when basically we get the info dump of what's going on from Jeff to Jamie. And unfortunately, because of Susan, I can't show you the moving imagery, but the camera is actually strapped to her extended leg, which means anytime she moves, we move along with her. This completely locks us into her mindset. It really helps us empathize with her. The fact that our movement is so tied to her movement is a great way of putting you in her shoes. And also, it adds to the chaos as well. So she's feeling scared, terrified. It's all frenzied. She's being moved around. And the camera movement gets kind of erratic as she's moved, which really works with that. So the camera work, completely putting you in her mindset. Brilliant stuff. And the second thing that they do, I think you see it, a really good example of it in the scene with the old woman pursuing for the first time. They go back to it a couple of times. It's we've had the rule set up that this thing just walks towards you. So we've spotted the creature, and we have a camera that is sat completely stationary. I don't think it's this exact moment, but we get several shots like this. And Poe, do you remember the camera will just rotate around? And when it's finished scanning, it'll catch the creature again, and then it'll go past. And it's brilliant because you have then a constant awareness of where the creature is and where your blind spot is. So you get incredibly anxious just wondering, like, I can't see it, how close is it, has it got me yet? So fantastic camera technique. Not needing to be fancy, it's just a simple setup that gets lots of anxiety in for the viewer. So
I don't know. I can't say I've ever run away from a life-threatening entity. Someone who's genuinely pursuing me to hurt me. But I've been chased during wide games. During playful childhood games, and there is this you're being torn between wanting to run as fast as you can while also being really tempted to look behind you to see how close they're getting or see if you've lost them yet. You're constantly in this battle between should I look or should I just run? Which I think is really well exemplified by this sort of camera shot of I want to look, but I shouldn't look. I should just go.
Yeah, she's got this tension of almost I have to remain respectable. Am I crazy now? Do I commit to this and just leg it? Or am I kind of pretending that this isn't happening? Yeah, it's a wonderful thing. It's she's so lonely in this moment. She's kind of playing by the rules as if the world hasn't gone crazy for her. It's so well done. Well, I think we should probably talk about the end, and we've given the big spoiler warnings, but we'll be very clear now. We're going in full spoiler mode for the ending. We'll talk about what happens. We'll do our interpretation of it. You've got the general overview. It is not about STDs. STDs do not make sense. You can't just give someone their herpes back. Doesn't work that way. I know what your school told you. No.
I know someone who tried.
Oh dear. Shocking. But the idea that it is the curse is a lot more about the feeling of living in a time where there's a loss of innocence and you're feeling sort of your past, or feeling that sort of sexual culture all around you, and it's kind of an unhealthy one, and so you will participate in it to kind of take the curse off you, but it's not something you can really get rid of, and you find yourself tied into people in a way you don't intend. It's much more about that, but in my take, I don't know, there may be heads shaking, but it's a more complex picture than STDs go.
Yeah, I mean, I think the STD imagery is definitely in there, and that's a really strong theme. But for me, that feels like that's part of the wider exploration of this sort of haunting culture that particularly affects, I would say, and particularly haunts women, arguably more than it does men. Because I think men tend to have a slightly more
Louise Perry says that men are more sociosexual on average. That's her way of saying, having a more casual approach to sexual relationships, being able to just move on from someone who you've had sex with and not really have much desire to see them again or form a relationship before or after.
I've heard it described as sociopathic.
Well,
which is a bit of a harsher way of putting it.
No, I think that's right. I think the feeling that I was trying to describe earlier is the way that being lonely, being atomized in modern society, it makes people want to reach out to each other to form these connections. And sometimes that's expressed by reaching out for having a sexual relationship with someone when you're trying to solve this problem of feeling lonely and atomized, but it ends up having a fleeting effect or no effect at all. It makes it worse sometimes in real life. For Jay, having sex with strangers or with friends, she's trying to alleviate this dread that she's feeling. But it never works.
And I think Paul is a kind of interesting complement to that because of his sort of sneaky. Look, I'll do you a favor. I'll help you out.
Yeah, we know what you want, Paul.
I'll take one for the team. I'm just such a nice guy.
Is it worth it? Is it worth it, Paul? Just to get Just to get into her pants, you'll literally die.
The absolute state of Paul. Anyway. Dear. So the finale, we've had some idea that the concept, the bounds of the curse have been probed. We learn it does have a definite physical presence. You can shoot it, but it doesn't do much. I do have I won't go into it. That's going back too much. We know they try and hurt it, but it doesn't do a lot. But it does have a physical form. So they come up with a plan. Would someone like to take on what the plan is? Just quickly.
They want to lure the being into a pool and then electrocute it with electrical devices. Is that right?
Yeah, that's it. They know it's going to follow Jay, so they do that. The creature, I think, then does know something's going on and decides to mess with them and just starts launching the things that had been set around the pool at Jay. As it's absolutely yeeting them at her, they're coming unplugged, so she isn't being electrocuted. But she is at much bigger risk, which I think is handled well to increase attention. it could look goofy. If the wrong audience started laughing at it, it could play badly. But I think it worked okay. We also learned that it's looking like her father in this moment, which is creepy.
Patriarchy much? Sorry.
The ultimate judge. She's
Oh
ultimate.
yeah,
You know,
that's who
she's
the film's actually about. It's the patriarchy. Sorry, none of this like cultural stuff. No, it's the patriarchy, guys. Sorry.
well.
I've solved it.
Read the fact that it appears to her as her father, and she doesn't tell her sister this, which I thought was very interesting. Which I don't know. I kind of read as it's a hat tip to the audience to do your own thinking and to work it out yourself, which I loved. And it makes it rewarding when you put the clues together. But to be quick about it, Paul, sorry, I think it's Dana, or no, it's her sister, isn't it?
Who? What?
I can't remember the
Sorry.
name.
Her sister flings a blanket over the creature,
Yes.
which helps Paul see where it is. He shoots
Thank you.
it
Now
in
I
the
know who
head.
you're referring
It goes in the
to.
water. Sorry, different brains. It goes in, basically, there's a tussle. It gets shot in the head again. And Jay is able to get out of the water. And in a move that has many a horror veteran groaning and saying, "What are you doing, you bint?" She slowly crawls within grabbing distance of the edge of the pool.
And looks in.
Indeed. I mean, I'm glad they didn't do the obvious thing.
Yeah.
But I was being like, oh, come on. Are you just going to scream, "I'll be right back" as well? Like, what's going on?
And she can't help but look, yeah.
She has to. So she looks in and sees this. You can't see the creature, and the pool slowly fills with this incredibly dark red. I hope you've got how beautiful this film is, folks. I hope you've picked this up. Like, this is one of the most beautiful horror films I've ever seen. It is up there with Suspiria. It's absolutely gorgeous. It fills. We don't get a big info dump because this is It Follows, and they don't want to over-explain ever. But immediately after that watery finale, we see Jay hooking up with Paul on top again, and it is absolutely hammering it down outside. It is borderline a flood outside. How do we interpret this?
I think that perhaps Jay, now that she's seen Paul take on the object of her terror, you know, this thing that was haunting her, it was Paul who stood there with a gun and protected her and defeated this thing. And now it's helped her to see him as not just a beta orbiter, sissy, girly man, but as a genuine sexual prospect. He seems like a kind of guy who can take care of himself in the way that Greg was earlier in the film. Also, you know, with this very same gun that Greg was using. That same thing that attracted her to Greg, this sort of self-reliance, she's now seeing that in Paul, and knowing that Paul genuinely cares about her and has cared about her for a long time, she sees that this is the right way to experience sex, is with someone who loves you, who is dedicated to sticking with you, and who can also protect you.
Oh, I like it. Could I possibly sell you on a reach?
With the rain? Go on.
No, just like I think I agree with everything you said. I think also she cared about Paul too. There's loads of moments where she's like hesitantly getting close to him, and he does kind of do a beta orbiter rush straight for the kiss, and it's the wrong read. but she has tenderness towards him, and I think she's hesitant to go with him because of actually having feelings, which is why she goes for Greg, because like, well, it doesn't mean as much, and I wouldn't want Paul to get hurt. So she's, after a traumatic experience, she's really hesitant to actually get with Paul. But it's after this that, you know, for all the reasons you said, he's kind of proved himself, that she's able to indulge in that.
Yeah, I guess that what I object to in that reading is that there really is no, maybe that's just my opinion, but there's really nothing attractive about Paul at any point in the film until he kills the monster. He's not funny, he's not smart. You know, the most useful thing he does is opens up a porn magazine and finds a photo inside, which is just kind of dumb luck. He's not very physically masculine. You can see his sort of skinny shoulders and bald chest, which on its own is not a problem. But in this guy who's quite timid and a little bit creepy, I think there, as an audience, maybe he is the only male attracted person on this panel. I'd have to say that the film is not trying to give me any reason to find Paul an attractive sexual prospect. Yeah, until he holds a gun, that's really the only attractive thing about him. And his faithfulness is the only attractive quality he has.
I would argue, but I kind of like that based reading, so I'll go with it. No, he is a creeper earlier on, but I think she might have bad taste.
I think for me, it feels like she's just broken, and he's there and he's taking care of her, to an extent. So it's not necessarily really that. I think I like your reading of he's sort of stepped up and shown himself as a protector, but I think also on some level she's just a bit. She just needs someone, and he's there, and she feels safe with him. Not necessarily a kind of he's become heroic in her eyes. It's just she's become completely beaten down, so she's kind of settling.
Well, in that final shot where they're holding hands in exactly that way that she described at the start, holding hands with a really cute boy and just not going anywhere in particular, just having like a romantic little date together. That is the final shot of the film, is her holding hands with this boy who's her boyfriend. And in that shot, I don't know if it was a wardrobe choice or some kind of camera angle, he looks much more attractive than he did any other point of the film. He's got this manly leather jacket on. He looks quite big next to her for the first time in the whole film. And it kind of does look like this is a happy couple, not just people who have, been thrown together out of circumstances and desperation. To me, I've read that final shot of them walking together down the street as these people are happy together, and they're no longer looking over their shoulder for what is following them or what isn't following them.
And ironically, there appears to be something following them in that shot.
But it's fully dressed, so I think that was not the. I think the point in that shot was they're no longer looking over their shoulder for it.
Nice.
How about?
That's a much more optimistic ending than the one in my interpretation. I like it. I prefer it.
Okay. Well, how about we consider the final shot of the pool? You've got those incredibly stark contrasts, the very bright blue, the incredibly rich dark reds that spread out and fill the pool and fill everything you see. That strikes me as a kind of visual representation of an irreversible change. Basically, the curse is sorted. You've gone through it. It's fine. And it's more about an experience that you've passed through, but it is now irreversible. You aren't going to take the red out of the water, and you can't remove the experiences of the world from yourself. That is what the pool turning red visually represents. And afterwards, we go to this much more muted scene. Like, these are such drab colours, but they're realistic, and it's cozy, and it's low stakes, and it's intimate again. And it's just flooding outside because it's the watery imagery is that culture is still out there. It's still all around you, and it's kind of relentless. Look how heavy that storm is. That is how relentless the culture is. but you're inside and you're together and you're connecting intimately, properly. And after that, as you saw, they're just outside again, and they found their own balance. They're never going to get rid of the culture, so there's always that kind of threat that the thing might be following you. But they've integrated it into their psyche. They've overcome it, and therefore it can't be the threat that it was.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I like the rain outside and the coziness inside. It's perfect juxtaposition. Right there in the same shot, you see the window and the sofa. I think that's pretty conclusive.
It's so cozy. They just need like hot chocky, you know.
For sure.
Some marshmallows on a fire, you know.
Oh, that would be lovely. Yeah. That was the only way I could make sense of the imagery, because you don't have the camera stare at water that long and then switch to another really watery shot. Unless you're just messing with us. Like, I thought, no, there's got to be some symbolism there.
Or you just want to keep film professors in lectures for the next 10 years.
It could be. Oh, sorry. Dying a bit. Okay. That's got us to the end of the film with, I think, a stunning and brave, definitive interpretation of what the heck was going on.
Stunning and brave.
Just one more thing, which my husband has brought my attention to. When we were watching that scene in the film, during the actual intercourse, it's not just the position that Jay is in, but the way the movement, the way that she's moving, kind of it looks like she's I don't know how to put this delicately. It looks like she's in the male action, you know, and just she's not lowering herself onto him. It looks more like she's penetrating Paul. The way that she's moving her hips. And somebody brought this up on an AMA with the director on Reddit, which my husband had just brought to my attention. And he says something quite vague. I just wondered if you two noticed that, or if obviously someone on Reddit also picked up on it.
Totally.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, I came up with my grand positions theory, you know, of course.
Yeah. Well, the director just said nothing.
Thrusts for numerology.
He said nothing is unintentional. That was his own.
That's really helpful, bro.
Well, I kind of feel this is justifying my thing of like she's active at the start, and then she goes into a kind of resigned passivity and functionality, and then she's active at the end and comfortable. And that it probably shouldn't be thought of as dominating him, even though she could totally take him in an arm wrestle. But more about her being active and passionately engaged rather than just a receptacle.
Yeah, I don't want to like hetero explain to a couple of lesbians, but to the risk of offending anyone, I've often thought that the way that men think of sex, you know, in this sort of power dynamic, from the male perspective, it seems to me that the act of penetration and even just the possession of the male sex organ is so central to their own sort of identity and what it means to be sexual that they kind of project that onto women in a way that this director would think that she needs to be on top to be powerful, when I don't think in my opinion, heterosexual women don't think of sex in those terms. When almost, I'm just going to leave it there. I don't want to talk about sex. It makes me feel embarrassed.
No, that's fine. And also, we're a family-friendly stream. We're the most family-friendly stream about disembowelings that you will find on YouTube. But also, standpoint theory is 100% legitimate, and you can totally consider the fact that the director, the writer-director is a chap and will be infusing that with chappish sensibilities.
But he's right. A lot of the people who watch this will also be chaps, and they will read it that way. So in a way, it's not invalid. He's putting up a billboard And a lot of people who read that billboard are getting the message. It's getting the message across. They get it. It's just that it doesn't quite land for me at least as that.
It does cause you to think some things through and have sort of. It does land differently with different audiences, let's say. But I don't know. Yeah. trying to keep it family friendly, which is difficult. Oh, this is like a dry run for addressing Knock Knock, which will be an absolute nightmare. I don't even
go ahead with that then.
I was wondering about inflicting that on Aaron, but I think that might be the last time he ever comes on a stream if I ask him to see that film. So
it's one of the few horror films I've not been able to finish because I found it just genuinely quite traumatic.
I was going to mention that right at the beginning to round things off in a wonderfully palindromic way. In a horror film with a male protagonist who is also in a very classically feminine role, Knock Knock plays with Keanu Reeves being sexually predated on. In a way he was in Dracula as well, although far more convincingly. And I found it an amazingly unsettling, effective, terrifying watch, where the gender dynamic was really interesting. Just like so that's from Eli Roth, and he also did Hostel 2, which loads of people slate, but I think is absolutely fascinating for running basically the exact same film and then saying, how would this work if all the characters were women? And for me, it's a really interesting experiment that was worth doing. I am often lonely in this view, but I think that's kind of everything I wanted to cover, unless you had more. We got really far in. We didn't even mention how good the digital blood is when Lacey Green gets cut there.
You're calling her Lacey Green.
That's all I could think the whole film. I know her name is Dana, but she didn't get to do much other than be shot repeatedly.
I wondered if that was funny because she was a kind of unlikable character. So seeing her getting shot wasn't that devastating. It was kind of mildly amusing whenever she got shot. But something about her, I don't know if, I want to say character design, but that's usually applies to cartoons and 3D CGI characters. But the way that she has that dark bushy hair and the strong glasses really sells that. I love that scene where you're hanging out on the beach just having a normal chat, and she walks by in the background, and you from a really far distance. Bushy brown hair, glasses. It's her. It's not the thing. It's fine. And then, yeah, exactly.
One of the best moments in the film.
But it works because of those big rimmed glasses and that big bushy hair. That's what I wondered if that was intentional.
Oh, I would imagine it probably was, just because she's so distinctive, and that you are easily taken in just because, just at one glance. Whereas some of the others, like Jay and her sister, are perhaps less visually distinct from one another. I don't know. Yeah, I think that's I would imagine is deliberate, and it's so effective because you sort of watch and go, oh, she's just coming to join them. She's just, oh, what? Oh no.
I cannot make a yes meme out of Paul with this. I just can't do it. The only other thing I'd say about Dana, and you can judge me for this if you want, but her other character trait is reading off a weird clamshell flip phone and reading a
Dostoevsky.
Was it Dostoevsky? Okay, I didn't look it up. It feels to me like something that should be obviously of deep symbolic importance for analysis, but I kind of refuse to analyze it when you just make a character read something profound. It just feels like such a shoehorned in thing that I refuse to analyze it. I'm like, no.
One of my least favorite tropes is when the characters are in class and the lesson they're doing is thematically in keeping with the theme of the film.
they kind of did that in this, and then I'm also working on review of the Craft Legacy, and they do it in that as well. I'm like, oh, 2 in a row. Oh, it's brutal. But yeah, you can tell someone was like patting themselves over the back on the back for that one. And it just always bugs me. Yeah, it's one of the weirder tropes that annoy me.
I think that's the problem with watching so many films. Like, something that would seem clever the first time you see it, perhaps just the more you see it, the less clever it seems.
Unfortunately so. I think that might be everything. So shall we go for closing thoughts and scores?
Yeah.
I just noticed waifu is muting while she coughs. Just because she did that, waifu, would you like to give your closing thoughts and score, please?
If I can get through without coughing. Yeah, I really like this film. I've now seen it 3 times, and I was saying earlier, apart from Harry Potter and Tangled, it's probably the only film I've seen more than 2 times. So it's done well. I think one of the things that we didn't really cover, partly because I didn't want to give too many people depression, is I think it portrays trauma really well, and it does a lot of stuff around that kind of that experience of, also representing that experience of trauma and shock and coming to terms with a kind of complicated internal grief. I think is something that the film does beautifully. And I sound like the woman at the start of Scream 2022, so if I get stabbed, it's entirely my fault for talking about intelligent horror or whatever she says.
I was going to mention that. Go on.
Yeah, just there's a chap with a mask and a knife, so I'd better make it quick. But yeah, it's I just think it's a really powerful film, and even though I don't find it as scary, having now seen it 3 times. There are still moments of really intense tension, and just the sort of underlying creepiness of it is still just beautifully atmospheric. So I'd give it probably 9 out of 12 burgers, with a fried egg and some cheese. So that's my thoughts.
Nice, very respectable. Poe, would you like to go next and maybe bring in the Scream reference if you wanted to discuss that?
No, I just thought it was funny that I watched Scream this Halloween season. I watched the Scream film, and I really made me chuckle all the references to elevated horror, and I got all of them. I always like it when characters are making references that I get. So it's not pretty niche references. Anyway, the fact that it was mentioned in that, I thought was great. But I think it has that, without sounding too pretentious, it has that slightly more respect for the audience is the expression that often gets thrown around when you put in stuff that people aren't going to get the first time. You put in themes that are kind of unresolved in a way that's open to interpretation. You put in clues that don't have a definitive answer. Obviously you can go too far with that where the director's just kind of taking the piss as well, but this really is a really good balance between being, on the first watch, a really, really creepy, atmospheric, beautiful, great soundtrack horror film that I could just put this in front of anyone. It's like, oh, you want to watch a scary film? We'll put this on. I recommend it for everyone. But then on subsequent watches, there's just more and more for your brain to chew on, and lots of imagery to enjoy. Cinematography and soundtrack always enjoyable on the rewatch. So yeah, I love it. I love rewatching it, and I look forward to watching it again in a few years' time when it's not too fresh in my mind.
Nice. For sort of trucky groundling appeal, that's all nuance. Would you like to put that in a number of burgers?
Oh, sorry. Is it always out of 12? Sorry, I don't always make it
always
the end
out
of your
of
live
12
stream.
burgers for very bad reasons.
Well, yeah, I'll give it a 12 burgers. I can't do much better than It Follows in terms of horror, in my opinion.
To break character a little bit, I find it funny to talk about a film for close to 3 hours and then just reduce the score to out of 12 burgers. I like the sort of absurdity of doing that. 12, incredibly generous, but you know,
well, it's not
gonna
perfect.
argue.
Like there's like things in the film that are like bordering on mistakes, and there are plot holes, but it's all kind of it's got that like dreamlike quality that like covers a multitude of sins. Where you say like, oh, does this really make sense? And you go, oh well, it's dreamlike, so you know, does it have to make sense?
Yeah, I would go with all that. You know, you can always nitpick. I can even nitpick Candyman. It's absolutely fine. And you know, for a film to be something you can watch 4 times and still be actively enjoying and picking up new stuff in, it's earned it. All right. Well, I think the appeal for this, apart from the incredibly strong, beautiful creative visuals and wonderful horror pedigree that isn't overlaid, it's not overdone, it's subtle references that let you get the influences from The Exorcist, from John Carpenter, and wider horror tropes put into a new creative context. Those are all great. But what really works for me is that this is a film with a very interesting idea that it doesn't patronize you about, and it leaves so much room for interpretation. I have this scene up here. Bless you, Joe. We're doing closing thoughts and scores, but you can enjoy it on the rewatch, mate, and I hope you do. So, anyway, bless you. I've got this screenshot up just to talk about sort of how much you can interpret this film without it having to be working out what the heck is going on. But you can have a little think about why this is happening. So during the exposition scene where we're finding out about the curse and how it works its way through the chain of people, Jay is just sort of distracted, looking at her hands, and she's laying the grass blades on her knee. And it's like, okay, what's that about? It's like, is she withdrawing herself because of finding it too stressful? Is she sort of resigned to her fate? The grass blades, they kind of remind me of like self-harm cutting, frankly, in a way. Like, is she feeling that and numbing herself? Or is she kind of tallying her body count here? That was the ultimate takeaway. I kind of wondered, is she working out her body count and making a tally, basically? None of those interpretations are actually going to affect the plot, but they can enrich it. And you don't need to settle on any of them to enjoy. The fact is, you can get a lot out of just thinking about the film on that level of depth, and it's not always going to be an absolutely crazy reach. This one might be. I'm sticking by it though. So yeah, amazing rewatch value. It doesn't talk down to you. It gives you lots to think about, and the music is really quality stuff. And they didn't do the proposed sequel that would have probably ruined it. So
I thought they should do a prequel about the girl. You know, what happened to that girl that we see at the start in the high heels. I thought that was sort of sequel bait almost.
It would have been great to sort of end a prequel with her, or with someone sleeping with her. To sort of, I don't know, futilely try and pass it on. That would have been kind of interesting.
I know we're finished with the thing. I always wondered why, in subsequent rewatches, why did she stop running? You know, that seems like an odd decision. It really works for the scene that it is. But it is that kind of haunting, like that idea that she's just given up.
Yeah, it's such a beautifully lit, enigmatic scene. I think she does have that sense of resignation that is so interesting. Like, she's not even caught. She just does give up, and that alone makes it so interesting. Sorry, folks, I didn't get your scores up there while I was talking. But I'm seeing a lot of coherence here. High scores, 8s and above. A strong 10 out of 12. I think that's a resounding approval. Another 10 out of 12. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I can see why. I could recommend this to basically anyone. I think this is one of those films I would use to try and justify the interest in horror. Like, no, trust me, there's stuff to think about.
It's smart, but not too smart for its own good.
Yeah, and it doesn't outstay its welcome either. For all the hipsterness, it could have easily been obnoxious, and I never found it obnoxious. So, strong 11. Strong 11 out of 12. No Tony Todd. So it does have the capper on it there. Yeah, there's an absolutely fantastic horror film. If you have not seen It Follows, and I hope you would still want to after this, check it out. Very strong recommendations from across the panel. I think that is everything for us. So I will quickly announce the horror homework. Whammons Month continues with... I'm not sure how this will go, but I really wanted to cover this. We're doing a Mike Flanagan film. We are doing Gerald's Game. Very intensely psychological. I am dying to know how people react to that. I think it's going to be divisive, but hopefully you'll go in with confidence in Mike Flanagan adapting a Stephen King story. But don't worry about that second bit. Don't worry, it's fine.
I was about to say you're burying the lead there, but it seems like you're burying it on purpose.
A tiny bit. I have feelings about... Well, never mind. We'll get into it. We are rejoined by Amy, who came on for The Haunting and The Haunting of Hill House. Will she come back after that? I don't know. It's going to be a gamble. I'm not sure Gerald's Game will be her type of film, but we'll see. So yeah, get your watch in for Gerald's Game for next week. Anyway, really enjoyed the conversation with you both. Thank you so much for coming on, Poe. Really great to be able to... I wanted to talk about this film with you for ages. I'm glad we managed it.
I'm very pleased. Thank you.
Absolutely chuffed. All right, and glad you enjoyed it too, chat. You have your homework. I hope you enjoyed this conversation, and I will see you again next week. All right, folks. All the best. Thanks, y'all. Cheers.
Cheers.
Night.